Today we're going to talk about a series of Russian airstrikes, some against Ukrainian positions inside of Ukraine and others against Russian territory, bombing themselves. We're also going to put to bed this rumor that North Korean troops are going to be arriving in Ukraine to fight alongside Russia anytime soon. And then we're taking a look at a Russian group that is using the Bucha massacre to promote a new supplement line. It's a neo-Nazi organization fighting alongside the Russian military. It's pretty dark. Now, starting out, there was a recent report that came out from a Russian media organization called Astra that was republished then and kind of reported on in the Washington Post, where they said that they have estimated that Russia has accidentally dropped more than 100 bombs on their own territory, as well as occupied areas in eastern Ukraine over the past 4 months. 100 bombs inside of friendly territory accidentally dropped in the last 4 months. That is a shockingly high number. It is hard to explain how much you do not expect that from a modern military. Bombs miss targets, but to have 25 bombs a month, almost one a day, dropping behind friendly lines is crazy. Now, when this is happening, they're saying that local authorities generally remain quiet about the incidents and report accidents, as kind of be expected. They often blame Ukrainian shelling, and we've seen this a couple times already. And they just refer to it as something happened, even if they report on it at all. And most of the times it kind of just goes completely unmentioned. There's been a couple cases where we've seen some of these fab bombs, 500-pound or larger bombs, detonate inside of Belgorod. And I'll pull up a map here to show where that is. And we'll hear that Ukraine shelled a building and knocked it down with mortars or 155 millimeter artillery. And that's not realistic given the scope of the damage. And it makes more sense now hearing that some of these are actual Russian bombs falling in their own territory. So the majority of what they're saying, they're saying these took place, are in the Belgorod region here, kind of across the border from Kharkiv, where we've seen a recent Russian offensive take these 2 chunks of territory just inside of the Ukrainian border. So a lot of these fab bombs dropping in Belgorod. And then the other areas around here in some of the occupied territories of Ukraine as Russian aircraft fly towards the front and release their munitions. Now, these fab bombs, we've talked about them before in this channel, when they have these new kits added on top of them, UMPK, I believe is what they're called, just to confirm here. Yeah, UMPK glide bomb kits. So it's roughly comparable to the U.S. JDAM, Joint Direct Attack Munition, where it is a GPS-guided munition. Russia's added these wings onto it to where it can kind of glide to a target at pretty significant distances, 40 kilometers or more, which is a lot further than we would drop a JDAM from. We do have something similar in the U.S. military. A lot of militaries around the world do. What Russia has done with this glide bomb is kind of a fabricated kit from commercial materials, civilian materials, which at times appear to be failing. Now, they say this independent Russian research organization called Astra verified that many of the incidents in a document that they were able to obtain matched those they'd collected from local governments and reports from local news media. They were also able to talk with a handful of eyewitnesses, residents of the Belgorod region, that confirmed some of these strikes had taken place. They said at least 38 of the bombs crashed into Belgorod between April 2023 and April 2024. Again, moving back to the map, with multiple bombs detonating in Belgorod up here. They say the majority of the bombs were discovered by civilians, forest rangers, farmers, or residents of villages surrounding the city. In most cases, the defense ministry didn't know when the bombs had been launched, indicating that some of them could have been there for days. They say the document, originally intercepted by Ukrainian intelligence and passed on to the Post, includes a spreadsheet of incidents citing emergency decrees on bomb cleanup and evacuation and appears to be a product of the Belgorod City Emergency Department. So what they're kind of pulling this from is local authorities saying, hey, something fell out of the sky, it's buried over here in my field, or it detonated in this forest or in this city or town or whatever it might be. And they're kind of looking at the emergency communications, which is going to happen. Now, they did mention they reached out to the Russian Ministry of Defense, were not able to get any statement at all. But they did talk a little bit about what might be causing this. They talked to Ruslan Lviv, who works with the Conflict Intelligence Group, who says that it's likely these failed launches or failed drops are due to the unreliability of these kits that they're strapping ad hoc onto these pre-existing bombs. He said, quote, unlike Western high-precision bombs, the UMPK kits are produced relatively cheaply and in large quantities, using civilian electronics where reliability requirements are much lower. So this isn't speaking, there have been bombs dud out and don't detonate at times. What they're talking about here are bombs accidentally detaching from the aircraft well before they're ready to launch those things. So this is not a matter of the GPS type signal didn't pick up we've had that before with JDAMs in the U.S. military, where the laser designator malfunctions or a fin doesn't deploy and the bomb veers off target. What it looks like is happening here, because these are dropping so far behind the front lines, is that something just malfunctions with the kit and the bomb falls off the aircraft. That could detonate. Also, the bomb might not be armed, which explains why some of these people aren't finding them for days or weeks after they drop. They don't even know when it happened. That aircraft gets to the front, and I guess they're not reporting back that they don't have a bomb under their wing, because you can feel that. When 500 to 1,000 pounds falls off your aircraft, you can feel when that happens. Maybe they're not reporting it up, or if they are, the Russian Ministry of Defense isn't doing anything about these falling in the Belgorod region. Now, moving over to some strikes inside of Ukrainian territory, I want to set the stage here by starting to talk about F-16s, because that's kind of the heart of what this is going to be getting at. It looks like Ukraine is going to be receiving F-16s sometime in the relative near future, like in the next month or so, maybe. There were rumors in the last couple days of F-16 strikes taking place in the eastern part of Ukraine. That looked like a rumor, nothing verified, but I wouldn't be shocked if you hear something or see some sort of evidence really in the next couple weeks. The way these arms shipments tend to work for new equipment is the West talks about a date in the future, and weeks, sometimes even months before they're set to arrive, you end up with a strike being used by that weapon to kind of catch the Russians off guard. Now, there's some debate about what the impact of these F-16s will be on the war. I've said in a very recent video, I think it will be an inflection point in the conflict, moving back to these glide bombs we talked about in the previous segment, where that's going to force these Russian aircraft to at least consider the threat of F-16s in the airspace and move back just a little bit. They're also going to be able to shoot down munitions like Shahed, some missiles they'll be able to intercept over Ukrainian airspace. I think there's going to be an impact, and given the effect that these glide bombs have had in multiple areas of the front, how devastating they've been, impacting that munition at all and that technique at all is going to have an effect on the battlefield. So I have come out saying I do think there's going to be a change. There are some very well-informed analysts saying something entirely different, arguing in a recent article here on Reuters that these F-16s aren't really going to have any real impact, and it could be quite a while before they have any effect in the airspace over Ukraine. Now, one thing that we've seen Ukraine do to kind of prep the battlefield for the arrival of this platform is to start striking Russian air defenses along the front. A lot in Crimea, but also in portions of eastern and southern Ukraine. And what you could expect is that you're going to see an uptick in the striking of these and the destruction of these air defense systems in the immediately preceding the arrival of F-16s. It doesn't do any good for Ukraine to take out an F-16 and then 6 months later, or take out an air defense system and then 6 months later F-16s arrive. Ukraine's going to want to knock holes in that air defense network immediately before those platforms arrive in theater. So it's something to keep an eye on. But it's not just Ukraine prepping the battlefield for the arrival of this new platform. It's also Russia. And one of the ways that Russia has been doing this has been striking deeper inside of Ukrainian territory against airfields, which may house F-16s in the future. Right now, they house a variety of Ukrainian platforms, and that's a real challenge. And it's very hard for Ukraine to mitigate that because the airfield doesn't move. And you can pull up a map, Google Earth, Google Maps, something like that, and spot airfields that could be used by Ukraine or are being used by Ukraine. Now, a lot of what we're seeing right now in the video I'm going to show here in a second is Russia striking Ukrainian aircraft on the airfield. That's a little bit different. That's dynamic targeting, recognizing that not only is the airfield there, but that there's an actual platform parked in a certain spot to target it. And Russia has been doing that more and more. But we also have seen Russia attempt to kind of crater some airfields, knock out the logistics infrastructure, the roads, the towers, all sorts of things to make these airfields across Ukraine less usable for F-16s when they eventually arrive in theater. Now I'm going to pull up this clip here and kind of talk through what we're seeing. This was released on Russian Telegram channels yesterday, where they're saying that an airfield in Mirgorod, which is about 140 kilometers from the front lines, so a ways back there, was targeted by a Russian Iskander missile. Looking at a couple different sources here, they say the Russian armed forces were able to disable at least 6 combat aircraft of Ukraine. It's not entirely clear what the battle damage is from this strike, but they did notice this is one of the deepest strikes against an active Ukrainian airfield in the northern portion of the country since the early days of the war. Turning over to Fighter Bomber, who has had some, different claims recently, talking about shooting down U.S. aircraft over the Black Sea that proved to be false. He does tend to be a rather reliable source when looking at anything related to air combat in the war, and this falls in that category. He says that according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they counted 5 destroyed and 2 damaged aircraft at this Ukrainian airfield. He says that he can see 5 planes hit in an open lot with 1 on fire. He adds that in any case, this is the most effective strike on an airfield from our side since the beginning of the Northern Military District, adding, for the sake of objectivity, the Ukrainians, their strikes have been no less effective. He said the problem for both sides here, and we're seeing it play out in this video as well as videos released showing strikes inside of Russia, lack of shelters. These planes are just sitting out on the tarmac, which makes them relatively soft targets for things like the cluster munition that was used in this strike in Ukraine. Fighter bomber added kind of a keynote here that the UAV was able to operate. I mean, we have this footage, some 140, 150 kilometers behind the front. That's a problem for Ukraine. Again, to take it back to the targeting of airfields, dynamic targeting requires eyes on the objective to make sure that you can see, or ideally you have eyes on the objective. Technically, you could do it with a source on the ground, but being able to confirm those aircraft are there at all. Right? But targeting the airfield, cratering an airfield this far inside of Ukrainian territory does not require dynamic targeting. You can use a map, plug in those coordinates to your weapon system, and effectively render those airfields and those airstrips ineffective. But dialing back here to Fighter Bomber, he says, yes, there are no shelters, but this benefits us, benefits Russia, because he says inside of Russia, they can move these further and further back from the front, where Ukraine does not have the ability to effectively strike those locations, but Ukraine does not have that ability. When he kind of hints at the argument we saw a few weeks ago, where Ukraine might opt to store some of these F-16s, it looks like they're going to, outside of Ukraine, inside, likely, of NATO territory. So we're seeing an increase in both sides right now. Ukraine striking air defense assets all across Russia and Russian-occupied territory of Ukraine, and Russia increasingly targeting and effectively striking Ukrainian airfields inside of their territory. Now, there was a report about a week ago coming out talking about how North Korea was on the verge of sending combat troops to Ukraine. And we're going to push back on that a little bit because at this point, that sounds like a rumor and a lot of single-source statements that have kind of not been verified, is the way to put it. Nothing official from Russia or North Korea at this point. So to put it bluntly, North Korea has not announced, and Russia has not announced, that there are going to be troops arriving from North Korea and eastern Ukraine in any capacity. So there were a couple comments made recently around this visit by Putin to North Korea where they signed this pact saying that they would defend one another in the event of an attack. We haven't seen the details of that agreement. It talks about likely sending weapons and munitions to one another. There's nothing that indicates at this point that it would mean sending troops right now to Ukraine. But what it looks like happened here is people kind of picked up on single sources. The Kyiv Post published, in response to that, Pyongyang announced early this week that it will be sending troops in the form of a military engineering unit to support Russian forces on the ground in the Donetsk region. The troops are expected to arrive on the battlefield as soon as next month. So again, that was a single source, kind of unnamed official inside of North Korea, kind of off the record, if you will. It was picked up as fact. The Defense Post went on to report, this comes amid reports that Pyongyang is planning to send military engineering units to Russian-occupied territories for rebuilding work. These units were previously deployed to China and are often disguised as construction workers, according to an unnamed South Korean official. Again, we're having a hard time sourcing where this originally came from, and it didn't help at a Pentagon press conference where the spokesperson, Major General Pat Ryder, was fielding questions about this, and the reporters were phrasing it as if it was a done deal. It's going to happen. And they were saying, comments on the North Korean troops set to arrive in Ukraine, instead of framing it as something that is rumor and isn't guaranteed. And General Ryder came back and said, quote, if I were North Korean military personnel management, I would be questioning my choice of sending my forces to be cannon fodder in an illegal war against Ukraine. We've seen the kind of casualties that Russian forces have taken. And what happened here is people took all of those statements and kind of wove them together, and all of a sudden it sounds an awful lot like North Korea is sending troops to Ukraine, and they're going to be used as cannon fodder, which means they're going to be in the fight, which is very different from the original leaks of possible engineering units going to some of the occupied territories of Ukraine to possibly rebuild. But look, I don't want to write it off entirely. It's possible that this does happen sometime down the road. In fact, the way that it's presented here makes the most sense, that it wouldn't necessarily be North Korean military personnel, but engineers, I guess technically still military, but working to rebuild some of the territory inside of Russian-occupied Ukraine. That's a far cry from North Korean troops storming Ukrainian positions. And I want to stress one more time, there is nothing official coming from Russia or the North Korean government that this is in the works or has really even been discussed. Now, the last thing here is not something I really expected to see yesterday, but I do think it helps paint a picture of kind of the information aspect of this war, if you will. So in the early months of the war, the Bucha massacre was carried out in northern Ukraine. We have CCTV footage. We have satellite imagery taken during and after this event occurred. We have first-person accounts from Ukrainian citizens on the ground after it was liberated by Ukrainian forces. However, we still have people inside of the United States and in the West who have made a platform talking about how this didn't happen, or it was staged, or just completely made up at all. What's interesting is when you get into Russia, you find groups that are not just saying it didn't happen, they're bragging about it. So think about that for a second. Something that the Russians are bragging about, an atrocity that some in Russia are bragging about. We have people in the United States, American citizens at times, arguing that it didn't happen. Who knows why they're taking that stance? There's an organization in Russia, a paramilitary organization called the Rusich Group. They were founded by Alexei Mikolov, who is a Nazi. And this isn't, I don't like the guy, or we have different political views, so I'm going to call him a Nazi. He had an interview recently where he said, quote, "I'm not going to go deep and say I'm a nationalist or a patriot or an imperialist and so forth. I'll say it outright. I'm a Nazi." That's it. And this Rusich Group is rough. Multiple allegations of prisoner abuse, torture, executions, war crimes. The list goes on and on. They're the ones who we saw some footage a few months ago released of Russian soldiers executing Ukrainian POWs. The Rusich Group cheered it on and said, yes, that's what we need to be doing. That's how we're going to solve this problem that is Ukraine. This Rusich Group on their Telegram channel just released yesterday a supplement line. Supplements. So they're selling all sorts of pre-workouts and things like that. And they've got a whole list of all the things you can buy here. And in their marketing for that on their Telegram channel, I'll put it up here, they said, load up. It'll be cooler than in Bucha. Cool like in Popasna. Popasna is one of the areas where the Rusich Group fought alongside Wagner early in the war. But they're using Bucha. It'll be cooler than Bucha. Glory to the Russian Empire, they say. They're using a massacre carried out by Russian forces against Ukrainian civilians as a marketing tool to try to sell more supplements. So again, this is a very small detail overall in the larger scope of the war, but I thought it was worth bringing up to highlight just some of these, awful events that are happening in the war that people in the West downplay and outright say didn't happen. When you move over to some of these more extreme groups inside of Russia, they're not only saying that it did happen, they're celebrating it and using it for marketing material. I think it's rather telling. But that's all I got for now. Of course, if you're interested in this or other national security subjects, be sure to check out our reader-funded publication, linked in the description below, called Between the Lines. I'll put up a couple articles talking to relevant events to this video. Check those out if interested. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.